Order, order. Stephen Kinnock to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I beg to move that this House has considered the effect on funding for Wales of the UK leaving the European Union. This debate is technically about budget decisions. However, as we all know, this is not simply working out how one reallocates figures. At its fundamental essence, this debate is about the people and the constituencies that we represent and their future. And that's where I'd like to begin. At the core of my Aberavon constituency is the town of Port Talbot, home to over 37,000 people. Since 1902, the beating heart of Port Talbot has been its steelworks, the largest, and I will confidently say the best, in the UK, producing a third of the UK's steel. A lot of people don't give a second thought to steel, but when you're driving your car, having a can of baked beans, or putting in a load of washing, there's a decent chance that you're using a piece of steel produced in Port Talbot. Everyone here knows that the future existence of the works, as we call them, currently hangs in the balance. But the story of Port Talbot over the last 50 years is the reason for this debate. It's a story shared by many towns and cities across the country, from Stoke-on-Trent and its potteries, to Dagenham and its Ford factory, or Merthyr and its coal mines. Like them, Port Talbot was truly built and grew on the foundation of one industry and one company. Half a century ago, the works employed nearly 20,000 people, of a population of 50,000. Every other shop and business in the town depended on the custom of its workers, and they did a thriving trade, especially on Thursdays, which was payday. Times were good. The town centre was bustling, and huge crowds would enjoy their summer weekends on the sandy beaches of Aberavon. As the plant churned out steel faster and better than anywhere else, we also produced extraordinary talent like Richard Burton, Sir Anthony Hopkins, and more recently Rob Brydon and Michael Sheen. But over the last 50 years, the decline of the steel industry in the UK can be seen in the standard of living in Port Talbot. The enormous layoff of 1980 of 6,000 jobs led to huge numbers signing on to benefits. Today, the works employs just 4,000 people, jobs that still provide a decent wage and are highly coveted. But nothing has replaced those jobs that were lost and the energy and pride that the industry gives to Port Talbot. Icons of our community, such as the Plaza Cinema, are boarded up, and smaller shops that depended so heavily on steel workers struggle on. Unemployment is 10% higher than the rest of the UK. Every 1 in 4 rely on benefits to make ends meet. The level of education of our community is proportionally much lower than the rest of the country. And let me tell you, the people of Aberavon, of Port Talbot, are as warm, as tough, as hard-working, and as talented as anyone you could ever wish to meet. But many are losing hope that their lives are going to give them the security and hope that all of us want to have. They simply don't see the opportunities for them. They know that we can't recreate the jobs and economy of half a century ago, but they're so frustrated that there aren't the jobs and economy for the next half century that they can play a role in. I've told the story of Port Talbot today because it is a town that, despite recent improvements, is in long-term crisis. The future of my constituents hangs in the balance, and unless we take concerted action, their prospects will continue to decline at a rapid pace. And that is why this debate today is so important. As much as iron needs oxygen to be transformed into steel, our area and the whole of Wales needs investment to transform its future into one where people have security and opportunity. And this is where we come to the crux of the matter. For years, the EU in various guises has contributed an enormous amount of investment in Wales, working closely with the Labour Welsh Government. Due to the consequences of the history I've described, South Wales qualified for the highest level of European structural and regeneration funding. All in all, EU structural funds and the Common Agricultural Policy deliver well over £500 million a year, in addition to money from other key funding areas, such as higher education, culture, and urban development. Working with government, charities, and businesses, this investment has made an enormous difference. It's built in... I will give way.
I'm extremely grateful to my very clarification on steel. But on the European funding itself, it's also a leverage to get extra funds from the UK and Welsh Government to match fund, which makes that project very valuable in our communities.
My honourable friend makes a very valid point. There is a clear multiplier effect with EU funding because it provides the confidence which opens the door to all sorts of other sources and channels of investment. So whilst we give the raw data here of those figures, the multiplier effect is absolutely enormous. It's built infrastructure, creating jobs and easier access for people and business, including the Harbour Way road network, the new Port Talbot Parkway station, and our town centre. It's helped develop skills, funding 4,885 apprenticeships and 1,360 traineeships for young people, as well as programmes that led to local people gaining 14,860 qualifications, preparing them for work. It's been a catalyst for business by funding the Baglan Energy Park, upgrading our commercial centres, and being a major investor in the specific innovation centre. It's backed world-class industrial excellence in South Wales by being a principal financial backer of the Swansea University Bay campus. And it's also contributed to programmes that improved our family and community life, from historic gardens and activity centres to toddler play areas and community sports facilities, ensuring that one day Wales will once again dominate the Six Nations. I will.
Would my honourable friend also, thank you, Chair, that agree that across Wales, 16,000 farmers gain direct subsidies from the Common Agricultural Policy. Without its funding, over 90% would go bust. Will my honourable friend therefore join me in calling on the UK Government to commit to continuing its subsidies to ensure that all farmers will continue to receive this funding?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention and agree absolutely that the role that the CAP has played in the agricultural industry in Wales, in the UK, and indeed across the entire European Union has been absolutely critical and has supported thousands of farmers and their livelihoods. So as I'll say a little bit later in my remarks, what we need to see is clear commitment to long-term funding to replace on a like-for-like basis every aspect of the European funding, including the CAP. I will give way.
Thank you for giving way. Would the member agree? First of all, congratulate the honourable gentleman and bringing the debate to Westminster Hall as well. It's a very important issue. Would the member agree that similar to the situation in Northern Ireland, European funding has been used to great advantage and that Brexit does not signal the end of funding to different worthy schemes? It just means signals a new way of distribution and an opportunity to ensure that schemes that are funded are necessary and helpful to the local communities. With that in mind, government has committed themselves to helping to ensure that the farming grants are retained, the community schemes are retained as well until 2020 within this term of government. Does he not accept that within Brexit we have a new way of doing it?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman, and there's an old phrase, never let a crisis go to waste. So, I think Brexit has caused a crisis, and it opens up massive questions about where we go now as a country, and a major part of that, of course, is what will happen in Northern Ireland. But it will be up to the government has made commitments up to 2020, but quite frankly, 2020 is in the blink of an eye. And we need a far more long-term plan, a long-term strategy, way beyond 2020.
In a way, congratulate him on obtaining the debate. Would it be the case that Welsh steel and other industries would benefit when we leave Brexit from the point of view of their procurement rules, whereby the indigenous businesses may prosper from the construction industry, etc.?
I think that the way in which this government has interpreted EU procurement rules has been completely wrong-headed for many years. There are ways in which you build in local content clauses to procurement which ensures that you maximise the use of British steel on British projects. Unfortunately, this government, because of its laissez-faire attitude, has hidden behind EU state aid rules, and as a result of that doing that, has failed to use EU procurement rules in a way that could have benefited the steel industry. That's one of the major 5 asks that the industry has had We've seen some improvements, but really we need to see a proper industrial strategy in this country, which clearly sets out how procurement can be used to promote British industry. I'll do one more and then I must make some progress.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, but would you agree with me that the real worry for steel outside the European Union is that the government will simply put no trade defence mechanism in place whatsoever?
I think that is a major concern. Of course, the British government has been the ringleader of a set of countries that was trying to, sort of roll out the red carpet for China, really, and allow China to dump untold amounts of its steel, unfairly subsidised steel, on EU and British markets. The big question now is, I mean, as we know, the Secretary of State for International Trade has said that he has no plans whatsoever to support the steel industry through trade defence instruments. So this is a major concern, and when combined with all of the other uncertainty that Brexit has caused, it is a major concern for our industry. Workways Plus is a project that helps long-term unemployed people and people with complex needs to develop the skills and qualifications that will help them into paid positions. The Kinnock project that works to help young people avoid the unemployment trap. Beacon Plus, helping Swansea University to work with industry to pioneer renewable chemicals, fuels and other materials, bringing another key future industry to the area. These are just 3 EU-funded projects already underway, with many others already in the pipeline. Each one makes the lives of our constituents better. In reality, the situation in Port Talbot, Aberavon and across Wales calls for far more investment to accelerate our recovery from decades of underinvestment in the face of the impact of globalisation and deindustrialisation. And yet, all this funding, all this progress is at risk after the referendum vote to leave the European Union. While, of course, the Leave campaign made promises that all EU funding would continue to flow to Wales at the same levels, I think we know that those promises are about as valid as what you could print on the side of a bus.
Will you give way specifically on that point?
I will.
He will be aware that the Chancellor of the Exchequer has made that promise, but he has also said that he wants to guarantee funding for those projects which meet UK priorities. And does not that imply, therefore, that the government intends to use the opportunity to insist upon how money it's spent called its priorities rather than those agreed with partners under the European Union?
I thank my honourable friend, and I think one of the huge risks for Wales in Brexit is that we will see a power grab by Westminster government, and we will start to see Westminster government using this opportunity to claw back the funding. We know that the 350 million was a lie, and the figure's far more like 190 million. So let's say it's the 190 million. Where will that money go? And will it just disappear into the black hole of the Treasury in Westminster, never to be seen again in Wales? And I think that is a huge risk for Wales in the light of Brexit. So now that all the bluff and bluster of the campaign, of the referendum campaign, is behind us, this now must be all about what Theresa May's government actually does. And so far on that score, the signs have not been positive. Despite repeated requests from the First Minister for commitment to full continued funding, so far the government has only pledged to continue funding of agreed EU-funded projects until 2020. Now that is not as powerful as a pledge as it may first seem, for a number of reasons. First, that's only one additional year after we're scheduled to leave the European Union in March 2019. The government has made zero assurances that funding can be retained after 2020. Second, the Chancellor made clear in his 13th of August statement that this only applies to projects signed before this year's autumn statement. Apparently, any projects signed after that will be assessed by a method that is yet to be revealed to us, a mystery method, if you will. Funding is therefore not guaranteed for multi-year projects signed after next month, even if they're in the current EU 2014 to 20 funding round. I will, friend.
Thank you. I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend for his excellent case and also for securing this debate. Would my honourable friend agree with me that uncertainty is the enemy of business? And with no guaranteed commitment from the government on funding post-2020, it could have a devastating consequences for attracting investment to Wales.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. I agree absolutely. We know, as we've seen in all of the feedback that's come since the Brexit vote, that businesses are in a holding pattern. Many companies, both outside the UK and outside the EU and within, are waiting to see how things develop in the wake of Brexit. We don't know, we have no idea at all what the government's top-level negotiating position is going to be in terms of a hard or soft Brexit, and we have no idea at all what the plan is for funding from the budgetary side in terms of replacing EU funding. And that is a double whammy, if you like, which causes massive uncertainty for business and relates back to this point about the multiplier effect, that the EU funding does open the door to other businesses coming in, and that uncertainty is, as you say, as my friend says, the enemy of business.
Almost. Can I thank my honourable member and welcome him for getting this debate. But on the multiplier effect, I wonder whether I could draw him. I know why he hasn't touched on this today, but the Wales Audit Office in 2010-11 produced the Wales Transport Projects report about how the Welsh Government had spent these EU funds, and there was a huge concern about the tune of £1 billion. I know you mentioned £500 million, but £1 billion that had been wasted opportunity.
It wasn't Stephen Kinnock, definitely Stephen Kinnock.
I am, thank you, Chair. I share, I thank my honourable, the honourable gentleman for his intervention. My sense is that we're moving pretty firmly off topic through that intervention, but what I would say is that value for money and delivering value for taxpayers' money is absolutely a top priority for all governments, including the Welsh Assembly Government, and in light of for example, unemployment figures that are coming out of Wales at the moment, which are certainly going in the right direction, a range of other indicators in terms of our economy, I would argue that the Welsh Assembly Government is definitely providing value for money for Welsh taxpayers. I will give way.
Would my honourable friend agree that Wales faces a triple whammy, because we start from a position of only generating 70% of average GDP in the UK per head? That's why we get multi-million pound investment that we're about to lose. And thirdly, of course, with the advent of tariffs that we're so dependent on and the inward investment that's just been attracted, we're going to end up in a situation where we lose trade, we lose grants, and we start from a weak position, which will be catastrophic for the people of Wales.
I thank my honourable friend and agree absolutely. I think that in many ways this debate is about resilience, and the resilience of the Welsh economy in relative terms to many other parts of the United Kingdom is weaker, and therefore the impact of Brexit, the impact of the losing this funding, the impact of inflation, as we've seen, the weakening of the pound is going to send inflation up. We know that the poorest are always those who are hardest hit by inflation, so the triple whammy to which my honourable friend refers is absolutely apt and correct way of describing what's happening. In his 13th of August statement, the Chancellor stated that this would only, funding is therefore not guaranteed for multi-year projects signed after next month, even if they're in the current EU 2014 to 20 funding round. Third, the government has not yet agreed with other EU governments that UK-based applications for EU funding will in any way be affected. The EU funding programmes for 14 to 20 are well underway, either having already been launched or in the advanced stage of planning. I fear that the government's increasingly antagonistic behaviour towards the EU and their lack of clarity over current future funding will harm the prospects of Welsh applications. Fourth, the government appears to have no plan on how the underwriting of funding is going to work at a small business or charity level, which is so important. Fifth, even if Westminster does replace EU funding, there are serious considerations as to how this will be done and calculated. The government will likely be tempted to simply increase the funds available on the basis of the Barnett formula. However, as the Welsh Labour government has made abundantly clear, the Barnett formula has disadvantaged Wales for years, and we simply cannot afford or accept this chronic underinvestment any longer. At a minimum, the chosen approach to replacing EU funds must be ring-fenced. It must be in addition to the block grant. And beyond that, a revision of the Barnett formula is long overdue. In short, there is no clarity and no confidence for the people of Wales. The government must urgently make clear that it will underwrite all project funds agreed in the 14 to 20 mechanism. It will maintain EU levels of annual funding to Wales for at least a decade post-Brexit. It will shortly set out how the replacement of funds will work in practice for Welsh Government and local organisations in the spectrum of Brexit scenarios. As well as this, the Government must commit to including Welsh voices in the negotiations, especially with regard to other themed EU funding programmes, such as the Erasmus Student Exchange Programme or the Horizon 2020 Higher Education Innovation Partnership. Of particular concern to South Wales is the future of the UK relationship with the European Investment Bank, whose loans helped build the Swansea Bay campus, improve the Welsh Water and Severn Trent network in 2015, and upgraded the Great Western Main Line. The last loan was worth £430 million. These institutions matter greatly to us. The head of the bank, Werner Hoyer, has already publicly made clear that current levels of lending to the UK cannot be maintained after Brexit has happened. Welsh voices must be heard in the negotiations, as our future so critically depends on these relationships with the continent, and the government must make clear whether it will seek associate status to these programmes and institutions. Government must bring clarity quickly, as the futures of people, communities and organisations across Wales hang in the balance. Though it looks likely that the entirety of the UK will suffer economically in the coming years as a result of Brexit, it is in many parts of Wales where it will hit hardest, as our economic resilience is relatively low. And this is not taking into consideration the impact of Brexit on the steel industry, which would be hugely endangered if it had EU tariffs imposed on it. If investment in Wales isn't maintained, vital projects will go under, followed by business. People will lose jobs, and unemployment and welfare bills will shoot up. Communities will fracture. Port Talbot and its people have been through enough. That does not have to be our future. In Port Talbot, Aberavon and across South Wales, we're seeing the enormous potential there is to accelerate what we're doing. There is innovation. One company, Specific, has developed a steel-based paint that acts as a solar cell to generate power. It could turn every building in the country into a power station, except perhaps for Boris's Foreign Office. There's the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon, which is a world-leading project to capture wave energy. There's the Swansea Bay City Region proposal called Internet Coast, which could transform South Wales into one of the best digitally connected places in the world. And all this is being done without any sign of a proper industrial strategy. Imagine if we actually had one. So, alongside its Brexit negotiations, government must also present a modern industrial strategy, backing skill development, innovation, modern manufacturing, sustainability, and the digital revolution. This strategy must focus on regions such as South Wales, where we have so much underdeveloped talent. So when the Welsh Secretary declares we shouldn't simply replace EU money with Westminster money because we have to address underlying issues, you have to laugh. Yeah. First, of course we need to address those underlying issues. And unlike him, I'm unwilling to settle for basic skills, but be ambitious to ensure my constituents have the high skills needed for new industry to flourish in South Wales. Second, it seems blindingly obvious that financial support is a precondition for building these industries and developing these skills. And finally, it's very nice for the Welsh Secretary to say that publicly, but I believe it's his government's responsibility to come up with a solution, so he may wish to get on with it. This government must recognise, with humility and sobriety, rather than the gung-ho hubris they've shown so far, that if Wales does not continue to receive funding for these crucial programmes, communities will be devastated for generations. And everything that means for people's lives, a lack of security, a lack of dignity, a lack of hope. And therefore, I hope that the government will reassure the people of Wales, and quickly, that they will ensure that the floor isn't ripped out from underneath them. Better yet, I will give way.
I'm very grateful to him, for securing this debate. Parallel to the UK's membership of the EU has been the rise of one of the most successful businesses in the world, namely Airbus. And one of the real threats to business is the arrangements concerning communication between the multinational aspects of that business. Doesn't he think it's essential now for the government to be working very closely with business to preserve the premier economic powerhouse that is a business like Airbus?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and I agree absolutely. There is no better example than Airbus as an exemplar of cross-country collaboration, cross-industry collaboration, the way in which Airbus has worked as a consortium that has developed through its supply chains a world market-leading capability. So when people say to me that the European Union is somehow a sclerotic project that doesn't work anymore, there's one answer to that question, which is Airbus. It's a fantastic example, as my honourable friend described. And what we must now see is a commitment from government to continuing to support those projects moving forward. It's going to be more difficult to do that in the wake of Brexit, but it's still possible. It's up to the government to show leadership to ensure that that happens. What we need is a comprehensive funding and industrial strategy that does not say that our best days were in the coal and steel boom years of the 1960s. No. We need to see a strategy that says that our best days are still ahead of us. Thank you.